There is a kind of feeling that's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't lived it. It's not failure. It's not that everything has fallen apart. It's not even something you can point to and say, this is the problem. It's quieter than that. It's the feeling of being stuck. Not stuck in your schedule. Not stuck in your responsibility. There's no die. Your life is still moving. You wake up, you go to work. Take care of what needs to be done. You show up for your family. You're about to come for saints. You go through your routines. From the outside, everything looks steady, even stable. But inside, something feels like it's not moving forward. And that's what makes it so confusing. Because you're doing all the right thing. You're still trying. You're still showing up. You're still believing, at least in the way you know how. But there's a quiet sense that something is paused, like you're walking, but not going anywhere. And maybe you've tried to explain it to yourself. You've told yourself, maybe I'm just tired. Maybe it's just a season. Maybe I just need rest. And sometimes those things are true. But deep down, there's another question that doesn't go away. Why do I feel like I'm not moving forward anymore? Why does it feel like I've been in the same place? And here's where it becomes important to look deeper. When every time you thought you're about to come time from what's happening around you, hope after hope has arisen, and every time you thought you're about to come from what's sitting inside you, you can't fully move forward if part of your heart is still tied to something behind you. You can't step freely into what's ahead if something from your past still has a quiet hold on you. And that's what a grudge does. It anchors you, not in a way that stops your life completely, but in a way that limits your movement. You still go forward, but not fully. You still grow, but not freely. You still try, but something holds you back just enough to keep you from stepping into more. And most of the time, you don't connect the two. You don't say, I feel stuck because I haven't let this go. Because it doesn't feel that obvious. It just feels like something is off. But here's what's really happening beneath the surface. Grudges don't just affect your emotions. They drain your energy quietly, consistently. Every time you replay what happened, every time you go back to that moment, every time you justify the pain again, it takes something from you. Not everything at once, just a little at a time. That little bit of emotional strength. And every time you thought you're about to come on, a little bit of spiritual clarity. And at first, you don't notice it. But over time, those small losses begin to add up. Until one day you realize you feel tired even when you haven't done much. You feel heavy even when nothing specific is wrong. You feel drained and you can't quite explain why. And when you're carrying something heavy, even if you can see it, you don't move the same way. You hesitate more. You second guess more. You hold back more. And then there's another layer to this. Not just energy, but clarity. Because when your heart is holding on to something unresolved, it becomes harder to hear clearly. Not with your ears, that quiet sense of direction you used to feel, the clarity you used to have, it starts to feel less certain. You question things more. You doubt your decisions more. You feel unsure about things that once felt simple. And it's not because God stopped speaking. It's because something inside you is creating noise. A quiet noise, a constant background tension. And that tension makes it harder to recognize what's ahead. And then there's willingness. When every time you thought you're about to come fine, when every time you thought you're about to come fine, when every time you thought you're about to come fine, when every time you thought you're about to come fine, when every time you thought you're about to come fine, when every time you thought you're risen, 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 it requires openness. It requires trust. It requires the ability to say, I'm willing to move forward, even if I don't control everything. That when you've been hurt, when you've held on to that hurt, when you've built quiet walls to protect yourself from feeling it again, your willingness begins to shrink. Not completely. You're still willing, but not fully, not freely. You become more careful, more selective, more reserved. You stay where it feels safer. The things are predictable, where you don't have to risk being hurt again. And from the outside, it may look like wisdom. It may even look like stability, but inside it feels like limitation. And this is the truth that's not easy to accept, but it's important to understand. It's not that God stopped calling you. It's that something is blocking your response. God's purpose doesn't disappear because of time. It doesn't fade because of delay. It doesn't get taken away because of difficulty. But your ability to respond to it can be affected by what you're carrying. Because purpose requires movement, then movement requires freedom. And you cannot step fully into your purpose while holding on to what broke you. You're about to come. You can still manage your life. You can still maintain what you have. But you can't move freely. You can't move fully. You can't move with the clarity and strength that purpose requires. And so you find yourself in this place, still trying, still believing, still hoping something will change, but not moving the way you expected. And the frustration begins to grow. You start asking questions. Why hasn't anything changed? Why do I feel like I'm going in circles? Why can't I move forward? And the answer, though difficult, is often very simple. There's something you haven't released, something you've learned to live with, something that feels normal but isn't meant to stay. And until that is faced, until it is brought into the light, until it is released, it will continue to limit you. Not because God is holding you back, but because something inside you is. And that leads to a deeper question. If this is true, if something inside you is holding you back, then what does God do in response? Does He force you forward and dash? Hope has arisen, or does He wait? There is something about God that is both comforting and at times difficult to accept. He doesn't force, He doesn't push. Time you thought you're about to come, He waits. And when you're in a place where you feel stuck, when you're asking Him to move, when you're praying for change, the healing for clarity, that waiting can feel confusing, even frustrating, because from your perspective, it can feel like nothing is happening, like your prayers are not being answered, like God is distant, like He's silent. But He's not. He's present. He's aware. He's attentive, but He's waiting. Not because He doesn't care, not because He's ignoring you, but because He understands something that we often overlook. Healing cannot be forced. It must be chosen. God does not force healing into your life. He invites you into it. He doesn't take control away from you. Time you thought you're about to come past, and when something is still being held on to, when something hasn't been surrendered, when something is still protected deep inside your heart, He waits for you to bring it to Him fully, honestly, carefully, but completely. And this is where many people misunderstand Him. They think if God wanted to heal me, He would just take this away. If God cared about what I'm feeling, He would remove it. If God was really working. When every hope is arisen, and every time you thought you're about to come to vendetta, when every time you thought you're about to come to vendetta, when every time you thought you're about to come to vendetta, when every time you thought you're about to come to vendetta, when every time you thought you're about to come to vendetta, when every time you thought you're about to come to vendetta, when every time you thought you're... But that's not how He works. Because healing is not just something God does to you. It's something He does with you. It requires your participation, your honesty, your openness, your willingness to release what you've been holding on to. And that's the part that's hard. Because sometimes, if you're honest, you don't want to let it go. Not fully. Not yet. Because the pain feels justified. It's because what happened was real. Because part of you still feels like letting go means something you're not ready to accept. It feels like letting them off the hook. It feels like saying it didn't matter. Christ is everything. But that's just, they bring with what they did. And none of that is true, but it feels true. And so you hold on to it. Even while asking God to heal you, and God in His patience waits, not passively, not distantly, but intentionally, waiting for that moment when you stop pretending it's gone, when you stop minimizing it, when you stop explaining it away, and you finally say, it's still here. I'm still holding on to it. I don't want to carry this anymore. And that's when something begins to shift, because here is the truth that needs to be understood clearly. God is not ignoring your pain. He's waiting for your release. He sees everything. He knows everything. He knows everything. He understands your heart more deeply than you do, but He will not take from you what you are still choosing to hold, because love does not force. It invites. It waits. It allows you to come to that place on your own. And when you do, when you finally reach that point where holding on to it feels heavier than letting it go, that's when healing begins. Not because everything changes instantly, but because your position changes. You move from holding to releasing, and forgiveness becomes something new. It's no longer about them. It's not about whether they deserve it. It's not about whether they've apologized. It's not about whether they've changed. Forgiveness becomes about you, about freeing your heart, freeing your mind, freeing your spirit from something it was never meant to carry. And until that happens, God will continue to wait, not as punishment, not as distance, but that's invitation. An invitation to something better, something lighter, something freer. And His tone in this moment is not harsh. It's not condemning. It's not pushing you. It's firm, but full of compassion. Like someone standing gently beside you, saying, you don't have to live this way. You don't have to carry this anymore. You don't have to stay where you are. But I will not force you to move. And so the question becomes deeply personal, not theoretical, not general, but specific to you. Are you ready to let it go? Not in words, not in ideas, but in reality. Because until that decision is made, nothing else will fully change. And once it is made, everything can begin to change. But that leads to the next question. How do you actually do it? How do you let go of something that still feels justified? How do you release something that still feels real? How do you move forward when part of you is still holding on? And that's where the next step begins. There comes a point where you can no longer say, Nizam Khan didn't know, because now you see it. You recognize it. You've connected the distance you've been feeling, the heaviness, the lack of movement, back to something real inside your heart. And for a moment, everything becomes clear. But here is something important to understand. Seeing it is not the same as being free from it. You can understand exactly what's happening and still wake up tomorrow carrying the same weight. Because freedom does not come from awareness alone. It comes from decision. And that's where this becomes personal, not theoretical, not something you just agree with, but something you have to walk through. And the first step is often the hardest. Step one, admit the grudge is still there. Not the version you've told people, not the version you've told yourself. When the honest version, the one that still reacts, the one that still remembers in a certain way, the one that still feels something when that person's name comes up or when that memory surfaces unexpectedly. Because as long as you keep saying, I'm fine, and when you're not, nothing will change. And many people stay stuck here, not because they don't want healing, but because they don't want to admit they're still holding on. It feels like failure. It feels like you should have been past this by now. It feels like weakness. But this is not weakness. This is the beginning of freedom. Because healing begins where honesty begins. And that honesty sounds simple, but it's deep. God, it's still here. I'm still carrying this. I haven't let it go. And when you say that, truly say it, something begins to open. And that leads to the next step. Bring it honestly before God. Not in the language you think you're supposed to use. Not in the kind of prayer that sounds polished and complete, but in the words that reflect what you actually feel. Because God is not looking for perfect sentences. He is looking for a real heart. And sometimes a real prayer sounds like this. I'm still angry. I don't understand why it happened. I don't feel ready to let it go. And you may think that kind of honesty will push God away. But it does the opposite. It draws him closer. Because honesty creates space for healing. And once that space is open, you come to the step that changes everything. Step 3, choose forgiveness before you feel it. This is where many people hesitate because they are waiting for a feeling, waiting for peace, waiting for the pain to disappear, waiting for something inside them to say, now it's time. But forgiveness does not begin with a feeling. It begins with a decision, a quiet decision, a firm decision, a decision that may not even feel powerful in the moment, but carries more weight than you realize. A decision that says, I release them, not because what they did was right, not because it didn't matter, not because you've forgotten, but because you were never meant to carry this. And at first, it may not feel real. You may say it, you may decide it, and still feel resistance inside you. That doesn't mean it didn't count. Because feelings often follow decisions, not the other way around. And every time you choose forgiveness, even when it feels uncomfortable, you weaken the hold that grudge has on you. But there is something else that must change. Step 4, stop feeding the memory, because you can make the decision to forgive and still keep the wound alive if you continue to revisit it the same way. If you replay it, if you rehearse it, if you go back to it again and again and relive it. Because what you rehearse. And so letting go is not just about one moment. It's about a pattern. It's about catching yourself when your mind drifts back there and gently, intentionally choosing not to stay there. Not forcing it away. Not pretending it didn't happen. But not sitting in it either. You acknowledge it and then you release it again. And you do that as many times as it takes. Because healing is not always one decision. Sometimes it is the same decision, repeated. And then comes one of the most powerful steps. To come 5, replace pain with prayer. Not against them, but for them. And this is where it feels the most difficult. Because everything Jean may resist it. It feels unnatural. It feels undeserved. It feels unfair. Why should you ask God to bless someone who caused you pain? And yet, this is where something begins to change. Because when you begin to pray for them, even in the simplest way, something inside you begins to soften. Not instantly, not dramatic, but slowly. The tension begins to ease. The grip begins to loosen. The sharpness of the memory begins to fade. And what once felt heavy begins to feel lighter. And this is where it all comes together. You don't heal by holding on. You heal by releasing. Not once, but again, until the thing that once had power over you no longer defines you. And there will be moments when it comes back. Moments when the memory returns. When the feeling rises again. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you're in the process. And now, you know what to do. You recognize it. You release it again. And slowly, quietly, you begin to walk in a kind of freedom you may not have felt in a long time. A lighter heart, a clearer mind, a deeper peace. And that freedom leads somewhere. Somewhere you may have forgotten existed. A place where your faith begins to feel alive again. It's not the place where your heart is no longer carrying what it was never meant to hold. Because the life waiting for you was never on the other side of holding on. It was always on the other side of letting go. Imagine standing in a room you've been in for a very long time. So long that it no longer feels strange. At first it did. At first it felt tight, restricting, uncomfortable. You noticed the walls. You noticed the limits. You noticed what you couldn't do. Because over time, something changed. You adjusted. You learned how to live inside that space. You figured out how to function, how to move just enough, how to cope. And eventually, it became familiar. Not comfortable, but familiar. And familiarity has a way of making things feel normal, even when they're not. In time you thought you're about to come, you might say, I'm okay. Because compared to how it felt in the beginning, it doesn't hurt the same way. It doesn't feel as intense. It's just constantly. And then one day, you notice something you hadn't really paid attention to before. A doll. It's been there the whole time. In fact, it's not locked. It never was. But you didn't walk toward it because something kept you where you were. Something told you it was safer to stay. Something told you this is just how life is now. And slowly, over time, you believed it. You believed that this was your space, your condition, your reality. But it isn't. It never was. And the thing that kept you there, it was the grudge. The pain may have brought you into that space, but the grudge is what kept you there. Because pain moves through you, but a grudge settles in you. And the longer it stays, the more it convinces you that this is where you belong. And every time you thought you're about to come out, but it's not. You were never meant to live there. You were never meant to carry that. And the door has always been open, waiting, not forcing, not pulling you out. And now you see it. Now you understand. Now you recognize what's been holding you back. And the choice becomes clear. Not easy, but clear. You can stay where you are. You can keep holding on to it. Keep replaying it. Keep protecting it. Keep carrying it. And life will continue like this. Or you can walk toward that door. You can release it. You can let it go. Not because it didn't matter. Not because it wasn't real. Not because they deserve it. You were never meant to carry it. But when you take that step, not all at once, not instantly, but truly, you begin to feel something you haven't felt in a long time. Lightness, space, freedom. Your thoughts begin to clear. Your heart begins to soften. Your faith begins to reconnect because nothing is blocking it anymore. And slowly, your identity begins to heal. You stop seeing yourself through what happened. You begin to see yourself through who God says you are. Hope restored, free, and your purpose, the thing that once felt distant, begins to come back into view. Because now you can move. Now you can respond. Now you can step forward without something holding you back. And here is the hope that matters most. Your faith can be restored fully. Your identity can be healed. Starting now, your purpose is still there. It has not disappeared. It has been waiting for you to be free enough to walk into it. And so the invitation is simple. To come but powerful. Let it go. Not later. Not someday. Now, right here. In your heart, make the decision. Release what you've been holding. Open your hands. Take that step. Because the moment you release it is the moment you begin to live again. There are some things in life that don't arrive with noise. They don't knock loudly on the door. They don't shake your world all at once. They don't come in like a storm where you can clearly say, that's when everything changed. No, some things enter your life much more quietly than that. They settle in softly, almost unnoticed, like something that just takes a seat in the corner of your heart and you don't even realize it's there until much later. And if you're not careful, they don't just visit, they stay. You wake up one morning, just like you always do. Maybe the alarm goes off. Maybe it's still dark outside. You reach over, turn it off, and for a few seconds you just lie there, staring at the ceiling. Maybe you say a quick prayer before you get out of bed. Maybe you've done that for years. Thank you, Lord, for another day. The words are still there. The habit is still there. The faith is still there. You get up, you go about your routine. coffee in the kitchen, the quiet hum of the house before everything gets busy. Maybe you open your Bible. Maybe you don't have as much time as you used to, but you still try. You still believe. You still want to stay connected. From the outside, nothing looks broken. You're still doing the right things. You're still showing up. But somewhere inside, something feels different. Not dramatically different. Just slightly off. And that's the part that's hard to explain. Because it's not like you've walked away from God. It's not like you've decided you don't believe anymore. It's not like there's some obvious sin you can point to and say, that's where everything went wrong. If anything, your life looks almost exactly the same. But inside, there's a distance, a quiet kind of distance. You pray, but it doesn't feel the way it used to. The words come out, but they don't seem to go very far. They don't settle in your heart the same way. You read scripture and you understand it, but it doesn't stir something deep inside you like it once did. You sit in a moment of worship, and instead of feeling drawn in, anything feel like you're standing just outside of it and watching. And maybe you've had moments every time you thought you're about to come has been dashed. Hope is arisen, and every hope is arisen, and every time you thought you're about to come time, then everything's to be going wrong. When there is no sign of a prayer being answered. Why do I feel distant from God lately? What changed? Why doesn't it feel the same? And then there are other moments. Moments during the day when your mind drifts somewhere you didn't expect. You're driving or sitting quietly, doing something routine. And suddenly a memory comes back. Not invited, not planned. Just there. Something someone said. Something someone did. A moment you thought you had already moved past. And it's strange because when it comes back, it doesn't feel old. It feels fresh. It feels close. Like it just happened yesterday. You can almost hear the tone of their voice again. You can almost feel what you felt in that moment. And without even realizing it, you're about to come a time you thought 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 you're about to come a time your body reacts just a little. Your chest tightens just slightly. And you catch yourself thinking, why do I still remember what they did like it happened yesterday? But why is this still here? Why does it still feel this close? And you try to move on. You shake it off. You distract yourself. You tell yourself, that was a long time ago. But something about it doesn't leave as easily as you expect. And if you're honest, because it wasn't just a moment. It stayed. And here's the part that's easy to overlook. It wasn't a big sin. It wasn't something loud or obvious. It wasn't something you would even think to confess. It was small, so small that you barely noticed when it stayed. It was a grudge, not the kind you talk about, not the kind you bring up in conversation, not the kind you thought you about, the kind you thought you about to come at work, just something you held on to. Quietly, something you carried without really thinking about it. At first, it felt justified. So, of course it did. You were hurt. Anyone in your place would have felt the same way. Someone said something they shouldn't have said. Someone treated you in a way you didn't deserve. Someone you trusted disappointed you, and you didn't explode. You didn't fight back. You didn't make a scene. You told yourself, I'm okay. You told yourself, it doesn't matter. You told yourself, I've moved on. And maybe part of you really believed that. But another part of you, and that part stayed quiet. It didn't demand attention. It didn't interrupt your life. It just stayed in the background. And over time, you stopped noticing it. Because grudges don't grow in obvious ways. They don't stand in front of you and say, look at me. They grow underneath. Like roots, slowly spreading in places you can't see. And here's what makes it even more dangerous. You didn't lose your faith all at once. You didn't wake up one day and say, I don't believe anymore. No, it was much more subtle than that. You slowly replaced it, not intentionally, not on purpose, but little by little. Instead of releasing that hurt to God, instead of letting it go, you replayed it. Instead of allowing healing to take its place, you allowed memory to stay in control. And over time, something began to shift inside you. Not your belief, but your closeness. Because it's hard to stay open when part of your heart is closed. It's hard to stay soft when part of your heart is guarded. Hope is arisen, and every time you thought you're about to come out, and the most difficult part to admit is this: about to come to hope and see, it feels normal, it feels reasonable, it feels like something anyone would do. That's exactly why it's so dangerous. It's normal, because what feels normal can quietly become destructive. What feels justified can slowly become a prison, and you don't see it happening. You just notice small changes. This might feel a little more tired than usual. A little less patient, a little more guarded, a little less open. You don't laugh as freely. You don't trust as easily. You don't expect as much. And every time you thought that's just life. But deep down, something is shifting. You're still showing up, still doing what you're supposed to do, still saying the right things, but something inside you isn't flowing the way it used to. And every hope is arisen, things seems to be going wrong. And you can remember when it started. You just didn't recognize it for what it was. It wasn't a dramatic fall. It wasn't a moment where everything collapsed. It was something much quieter than that. It was a small grudge that never left. And now it's been there so long, it almost feels like part of you, like it belongs there. Like removing it would mean reopening something you've tried to bury. So you leave it. You keep going. You keep living. The quiet weight remains. That subtle feeling that something isn't right, even though everything looks right, it remains. And here's the truth that's been sitting beneath all of this. Something small has been growing, and you didn't notice it. And it's not harmless. It's been shaping the way you think. It's been in the way you respond, the way you see people, the way you see yourself, the way you relate to God. And every time you thought you're about to come to it's been quietly taking up space in your heart. And until you face it, until you bring it into the light, quietly, patiently, almost invisibly, until one day you don't just feel the distance. You realize something deeper. Didn't just stay, it changed you. And that's where everything begins to unfold. It almost never begins the way you think it would. If someone had sat you down on the day it happened, that exact day, and told you, be careful. This moment is going to stay with you longer than you expect. You probably wouldn't have believed them. You would have brushed it off. You would have said, no, I'm not like that. I don't hold on to things. I get over things. And you would have meant it. Because in that moment, you weren't trying to become bitter. You were just trying to get through something that hurt. That's all it was. You were trying to process it, trying to stay composed, trying to keep moving. Maybe it was something that looked small to everyone else. A comment that seemed casual on the surface, but it landed deeper than it should have. A conversation that didn't go the way you expected. A moment where you felt dismissed or overlooked or not valued the way you thought you were. And you walked away from it. You didn't make a scene. You didn't argue. You didn't defend yourself the way you could have. You just, at least that's what it looked like. That something didn't pass. Something stayed behind. And at first it didn't feel like a grudge. It didn't feel heavy. It didn't feel dangerous. It just felt like you told yourself, I'm just remembering what happened. And that sounds harmless, doesn't it? Just remembering. Nothing wrong with that. So you let it replay once. Maybe later that day, maybe that night when you were lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that happened, you replayed the conversation when they said, what you said, what you wish you had said. And then the feeling came back with it, because memory doesn't come alone. It brings emotion with it. And even if the words fade a little, the feeling stays strong. About to comfortable feeling, that sting, that sense of that shouldn't have happened. And so you revisit it again. Not because you're trying to hold on to it, but because your mind naturally goes there. It's quiet, it's subtle. You're driving somewhere, and every mind drifts. You're doing something simple, washing dishes, folding clothes, sitting alone for a moment. And there it is again. In memory, the moment, the come feeling. And each time it comes back, you don't just remember what happened. You feel it again. And feelings, they don't fade as quickly as facts. Facts become distant over time. But feelings, they stay familiar. They stay alive. So even as time passes, the emotion doesn't move as far away as you expect it to. And this is where something begins to shift. And without even realizing it, you start to protect that feeling. You don't say it out loud. You don't announce it. But inside, you begin to build a quiet defense around it. You start telling yourself things like, I had every right to feel that way. They shouldn't have done that. They knew better. That's the part that makes this so convincing. Because most grudges are not built on imagination. They're built on something real. Something that actually happened. Something that actually hurt. So instead of questioning the feeling, you begin to justify it. You give it permission to stay. You make room for it. And every time you thought you're about to come, when every hope you've had has been dashed, hope after hope is arisen, and every time you thought you're about to come, when it's no longer just memory. Now it's becoming interpretation. You start adding meaning to the moment. They don't respect me. They never really cared. That is just how people are. This always happens to me. And every hope you've had has been dashed. And every time they feel like conclusions. Like you figured something out. Like you've uncovered a truth. But here's what's really happening. The moment is no longer just something that happened. It's becoming something that defines how you see things. How you see people. How you see yourself. And this is where the process deepens. Because now every time the memory comes back, it's not just about the past. It starts influencing the present. You walk into new situations carrying old conclusions. You meet new people with old expectations. You hear new words through old filters. And even when something is good, part of you is cautious. And every time you thought you're about to, part of you is waiting for something to go wrong. And it doesn't happen all at once. It builds quietly, like layers. And over time, something else begins to happen. You start protecting the wound. Not because you want to stay hurt, but because letting it go feels uncomfortable. It feels like opening something you've tried to close. Because after a while, the pain becomes familiar. You know how it feels. You know how to carry it. Being dissolved. You know how to manage it. It becomes part of your routine, part of your inner world. And the idea of releasing it feels like stepping into something unknown. And so, without saying it out loud, you choose to keep it. Not aggressively, not intentionally, just quietly. And this is where that truth becomes real. You didn't choose bitterness. You chose not to release it. There's a difference. You didn't decide, I'm going to become a bitter person. You simply never made the decision to let it go. And every time you thought you're about to come, time begets come fight one, a passive one, but a powerful one. Because now the grudge is no longer something you visit occasionally. It's something you carry with you. It's there when you wake up. It's there in your reactions. It's there in your thoughts, even when you don't connect it directly to the original moment. That's to shape how you respond to people. And how quickly you trust. How deeply you open up or don't. And every time you thought you're about to come, the more justified it feels, the less visible it becomes. until one day you stop seeing it as something separate from you. It just feels like your personality, your way of thinking, your way of protecting yourself. And that's when the real danger begins. Because when something becomes part of your identity, you stop questioning it. You come challenged. You stop asking whether it should still be there. Instead, you start building your life around it. Our boundaries become tighter. As your expectations become lower, your trust becomes thinner. Your heart becomes more guarded. Not completely closed, but not fully open either. Just as off to function. Just enough to keep going. To come to both that bar, just enough to say, I'm fine. But underneath that, still replaying, still protecting, still growing. And here's the quiet warning that many people miss. A grudge doesn't need your attention to grow. It just needs your permission to stay. And if you never stop to face it, if you never bring it into the light, if you never make a clear, intentional decision to release it, silently, patiently, gradually, until it doesn't just affect how you feel about one person, it begins to affect how you see yourself. And that's where the process moves from something hidden to something that begins to define you. And that's where the danger truly begins. There is a moment in this journey that is very hard to recognize while you're in it. Nothing dramatic happens on the outside. There's no clear line you can point to and say, that's when everything changed inside me. It's quieter than that, slower than that. It happens in the background of your life while everything else seems normal. At first, what happened to you was just that. Something that happened, a moment, a conversation, a betrayal, a disappointment. Something you could look back on and say, that hurt me. And for a while, it stayed in that place. It was something outside of you, something in your past, something you experienced. But when it doesn't leave, when it stays, when it gets revisited again and again, it begins to move, not physically, internally. It moves from something that happened to you to something that slowly starts shaping you. And this is where many people don't realize what's happening, because identity doesn't change all at once. It doesn't suddenly flip. It forms quietly through repetition, through the thoughts you repeat, through the stories you tell yourself, through the way you interpret your experiences. At first, the thoughts seem simple, honest, understandable. Things seems to be going wrong. When everything seems to be going wrong, they shouldn't have treated me that way. I gave them my trust. And those thoughts, they're real. They're human. Anyone listening would probably agree with you. But when those thoughts are repeated without healing, they begin to take on a different role. They stop being reflections of what happened, and they begin to turn into statements about who you are. And you don't even notice when it happens. You don't sit down and decide, this is going to define me. It just slowly becomes part of the way you see yourself. You begin to carry quiet labels, not out loud, not something you say in conversation, but something you feel. I'm the one they betrayed. I'm the one who was overlooked. I'm the one people don't treat right. I'm the one who gets hurt. And those statements don't feel like identity. They feel like truth. They feel like something you've learned about, something you figured out through experience. But there's a difference between truth that heals and identity that traps. And what you're carrying begins to lean toward the second. Because when your sense of self is built around pain, it begins to limit you in ways you don't immediately see. It affects how you walk into a room, how you look at people, how you respond to opportunities, how you open up. And what makes this even more difficult is that on the surface, you may still say all the right things. You may still speak words of faith. You may still declare what you know is true. You may say, I am loved, I am chosen, I am redeemed. And those words are true. But deep inside, there is another voice, quieter, more familiar, and it doesn't argue loudly. It just reminds you, remember what happened. Remember how that felt. Don't forget how they treated you. And not because it's stronger, but because it's repeated more often. Because you've spent more time sitting with the pain than sitting with the truth. And this is where everything begins to connect. Because whatever you rehearse, if you rehearse the hurt, you become more guarded. If you rehearse the betrayal, you become more suspicious. If you rehearse the rejection, and it shows up in small ways, but you hesitate before trusting someone new. You hold back just a little more than you used to. You read into people's words more carefully. Do it yourself, just in case. And you tell yourself, I'm just being careful. I'm just being wise. But there is a difference between wisdom and fear. Become protects your life. Fear restricts it. And what you're carrying slowly begins to lean toward restriction. Because the same walls that keep pain out also keep connection from coming in. They keep relationships at a distance. They keep joy from going as deep as it could. They keep love from fully reaching your heart. And over time, something else begins to grow. A quiet sense of disconnection. Just from people, but from yourself. You don't feel as open as you used to. You don't feel as light. You don't feel as present. You're there, but not fully there. It begins to affect your relationship with God. Because here is a truth that is easy to miss. God speaks to who you are, not who your pain tells you that you are. God calls you redeemed. Pain calls you wounded. God calls you whole. Pain calls you broken. God calls you chosen. Pain calls you overlooked. And whichever voice you listen to more, whichever one you rehearse more, becomes the one you begin to respond to. And this is where many people quietly struggle. Not because they don't believe in God, but because they have slowly begun to believe their pain more than they believe Him. Not in a loud way, not in a rebellious way, but in a quiet, a leaning, a subtle movement toward what feels familiar. And for those who have carried pain for years, this becomes even more difficult. Because when every hope is arisen, because when things seems to be going wrong, it feels permanent. It feels like part of your story. The personality become part of who you are. And the thought of letting it go feels like losing something. Even if that something has been hurting you. But here is what you need to hear clearly, gently, but honestly. You are not what happened to you. You are not the betrayal. You are not the rejection. You are not the moment that hurt you. But if you continue to rehearse it, it will continue to redefine you. And it won't stop there. It won't just affect how you see yourself. It will begin to affect how you relate to God. And that's where the next shift begins. At some point, you begin to notice something that's difficult to put into words. It's not something you can easily explain to someone else, but you feel it. Your faith doesn't feel the same. Gone, not broken, but different. It has arisen when every time you thought you're about to come, you still believe. That hasn't changed. If someone asked you, you would still say, yes, I believe in God. You still know what Scripture says. You still understand the truth. You still try to live the way you know you should. But something inside you doesn't respond the same way anymore. You pray, but it feels like your words don't go very far. They come out, but they don't settle in your heart. Because you don't feel the same connection. You don't feel the same closeness. You read, you understand them, but they don't move you the way they once did. You hear a message and it makes sense, but it doesn't stir something deep inside you. You worship and you want to feel something, but your heart feels quiet still, almost like it's standing at a distance. And you start trying to fix it. You think, maybe I need to pray more. Maybe I need to read more. Maybe I need to try harder. So you push yourself. You show up. You put in the effort. But it doesn't change the way you expected. And that's when the questions begin. What's wrong with me? Why does my faith feel weak? Why can I feel what I used to feel? And this is where many people misunderstand what's happening, because they assume the problem is effort. They think it's about doing more, trying harder, being more disciplined. But sometimes the issue is not what you're doing, it's what you're carrying. Because here is a truth that is easy to overlook. It's hard to trust God when your heart is full of unresolved hurt. Not impossible, because trust requires openness, and hurt creates resistance. Even if it's subtle, even if it's quiet, even if you don't fully recognize it. If part of your heart is holding on to pain, it will affect how you relate to God. You may not connect the two right away, but they are connected, because when you've been hurt, something inside you changes. You become more cautious, more guarded, less willing to fully open. And that doesn't just apply to people. It applies to God too. Not in a way where you say, I don't trust God, but in a quieter way, a deeper way. You hold back just a little. You don't lean on Him the same way you used to say. And so your faith begins to shift, not in belief, but in dependence. You still believe in God, but you don't rely on Him the same way. You start depending more on yourself, more on what you can control, more on what feels safe. Because control feels safer than vulnerability, and trusting God requires vulnerability. Then Jesus went water off. It requires letting go. And every part of your heart is still holding on to pain. That kind of surrender feels risky. Even if you don't say it out loud, even if you don't fully realize it. And this is where the warning becomes important, because this process doesn't happen loudly. It happens slowly, quietly, gradually, and doesn't announce itself. It doesn't say, I'm here to weaken your faith. It simply sits, and over time, it replaces something piece by piece, until one day you realize you're still doing everything you used to do, but it doesn't feel alive anymore. The connection isn't as strong. The closeness isn't as real. The fire isn't there the way it used to be. And the most dangerous part is this. You get used to it. You adjust. You settle into it. You accept a version of faith that works, but doesn't live. And that's where something important is lost. Because faith was never meant to be something you just maintain. It was meant to be something you experience. Something that moves. Something that breathes. Something that connects you deeply to God. But when something is sitting in your heart, something unresolved, something unhealed, even something small, it begins to affect everything. Not dramatically, not all at once, but consistently. And over time, it doesn't just weaken your faith. It begins to take something else from you. Something just as important. Something that shapes how you move forward in life. And you're about to come to your sense of purpose. Because when your faith is not fully alive, your ability to move forward becomes limited. And that's where the next part of the story begins.